morning, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Agronomist. And yes, I'm not Lance. We're trying a couple things new today. One, Lance is not here, so this is going to be the first time that we've done a Ask the Agronomist without Lance. So this was originally his baby and his idea, and he has been a part of this every time that it's been aired. But today, Lance is actually on his way to Iowa State with his youngest daughter for freshman orientation. And so that's why he's not here. So to stay with the regular cadence that he normally does of every other Thursday morning, he was willing to defer to me and let me guest host. That's going to be a little bit different for everybody. I have been a part of Ask the Agronomist before, but never without Lance. So that's where Lance is at. So I don't know if I've said it yet. I'm Chris Callow. I'm a territory agronomist for DeKalb Asger as well. I just have the territory just to the south of Lance. So I've had the opportunity to know Lance probably somewhere in the neighborhood of pushing 30 years, because I actually met him whenever I was a summer intern back in the 90s at our Jerseyville research farm. So that's one thing that's different today is we don't have Lance here. Another thing that's different is we're trying a new device to actually record this so that we can maybe enable a few other things while we're doing this. So we're trying that new. We are also going to try using some pictures on a TV that's behind me. So we're trying a few things new today. It could be an epic failure. We don't know yet. We'll see how this goes. But producer Jennifer is here to help me do all of this. And she is, her and I we decided we would go out on a limb and see if this was possible and play with a few ideas. We had toyed with going actually live from the field today, but we were a little bit nervous that we could pull all of this off, and so we decided to eliminate that idea and stick with being in an office. So that's the plan. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. Jennifer will help monitor the chat. We have our summer intern here, Austin. He can monitor the chat as well and chime in. So I've got actually two producers here with me today to help out. So am I missing anything, Jennifer, that I need to talk about?
No, I think you're good to go.
Okay, good deal. Well, thank you. So I want to talk through a few things today, either questions that we've been getting the last couple weeks or some questions as we start thinking about the next couple weeks. So we're going to start first with talking a little bit about stink bugs. And so I have done a video on this, and we actually put this up on YouTube a couple days ago. But this is one of the pictures that I took. And so what we've noticed, we've had a lot of people asking, what is this injury that you see here in the field? And so if you can see those or not, it's going to be kind of tough. But you see these plants that have disformed tops to them. Sometimes maybe the tops are missing. You will also occasionally have pictures that look like this one right here, where you have these pinholes that are through them. You've got some more damage here that's not quite as severe, but again, you see some pinholes in the leaves and tops missing. So what this is, again, this is stink bug damage. And so from what we know today is that this damage happens earlier on in the plant's life. So when that corn plant is, let's say, maybe V1, V2 time, or that stage of growth, the stink bug will actually penetrate through the stalk with its piercing mouth part, and that's where, as the leaves unroll, that's where you get this pinhole type look, because those leaves are wrapped up right when they're smaller, and so when it pokes through it and then it unfolds, you get that pattern of 4 leaves. So it seems like the damage is probably a little bit more severe this year than what we've had in previous years. Lance has some situations where it's maybe 20-25% of the plants in fields, which I have not seen anything near that severe across my geography. Probably in my geography, the most I've seen is maybe 1 to 2% of the plants. It looks really bad in places because you have examples like where I showed a second ago, where you've got 3, 4, 5 plants right in a row that damaged, and it's easy to see those, and it's easy to kind of think that it's a higher percentage. But as I've walked some of the fields and done counts, a lot of times it's less than 1% of the plants. So what can you do about it? There's not really any great data or any good guidance out there that can tell you what to do or how to try to address it, or is there an economic threshold, or you know, and part of the problem is that every time Lance and I and others have walked the fields, we've never physically been able to find a stink bug in the field. And so it makes it really difficult to make a recommendation to, throw an insecticide in with a post application or something when you can't physically find any bugs to try to kill. Um, we thought for a little while that maybe there was a little bit of a correlation to like what we see in bean leaf beetle and soybeans, in that the first emerged cornfields might be the worst or the more severe. And so if you think about, like in a bean leaf beetle, the first emerged bean fields, that's where the bean leaf beetles go, and they generally have a tendency to kind of feed more on those plants because that's the first food source, if you will. So we thought that was kind of the trend that we were seeing in corn. Now, as the season has progressed, we've still seeing some injury in later planted corn as well, but just quite not as severe as what we were seeing with some of the first planted corn. So what's the fate of these plants? Let's talk a little bit about that. It really varies, right? It varies by the severity of the injury. So some of these plants, like what you're seeing right here, that just have maybe a little bit of a pinhole in them, and that's really all they have. Those plants are likely going to be okay. They're going to continue to grow. They're going to be perfectly fine. They're going to put on an ear and they're going to look normal. The plants that I showed in the picture before, right, where these are more severely stunted and pruned off, and you've got this wrapping up that happens, and those plants are going to be stunted, and they are going to be behind, and they will, in my opinion, they will still put on an ear, but it will likely not be near as big of an ear as what the neighboring plants are that are unaffected. And Lance is actually going through the effort. He did this at the site there in Monmouth where he does a little bit of work. He actually has flagged 10 different plants and took pictures of them, and then he's going to follow those through to maturity and look at the development of those plants. But these types of plants that are on this picture here behind me are more severe. They will be more severely stunted, and they will be yield impactful. So a little too late to think about what to do for this year. As we go into next year and subsequent seasons, we may need to start thinking about, do we throw an insecticide in just to try to help eliminate the stink bug on those early post applications. Again, I think it's too late now to try to do this in most fields just because we can't find them. So I think I've hit that well enough. I don't know that I need to cover any more there. Again, I did put a quick, I know, Jennifer, it wasn't short enough, but there is a 3-minute video that is specifically about stink bug that is on the YouTube page.
Yeah, and if you want to go ahead and break into that a little bit and tell folks about your little corner of our YouTube page, I think it's a great time to kind of talk about what you're going to be doing here moving forward.
Oh, okay. So something that we decided we would try to introduce is that opposite the weeks, at least, of when Lance does Ask the Agronomist, we were going to try to do Carlisle's corn herb. And so I got to give credit where credit's due. Jennifer was the one that came up with the naming there, the nomenclature, and she's the one that's helping produce the videos and whatnot. But that's what the stink bug one was, the first one that I put together, and it's out there. So the intent is that as the season progresses, I will be releasing some periodic little quick videos on something. And some of the ideas I had to do in upcoming sessions, we're actually going to talk about today. So I may have to either I'll redo them or I'll have to come up with something different in content. So
yeah, so it's just great supplement to ATA. You just need a 1-minute hit versus an hour long. It's a great little video to hear from Carlisle himself.
Yep. The other thing that at least people that know me well, as I'm standing here trying to watch myself do this, people that know me well know that I cannot stand in one place for very long. And I was kidding earlier that I need my feet cemented in concrete here because I'm going to have a tendency to want to roam, and hopefully I can stay on camera. So anyway, I'll go next to sulfur deficiency. And so actually I did put together a video on this as well. And you've put this out there, right? So this is on our YouTube page as well. You want to zoom in on, we're going to try something here. So this is partly why we tried a different device as well, so that we could have this benefit of zooming. to try to help these pictures be a little bit more relevant to you guys as the viewers. So what you're seeing here is sulfur deficiency, right? This interveinal chlorosis or striping that you see in corn plants. Pretty common to see this this time of year because we're in this growth stage where as corn starts to really kind of become, let's say, waist tall or so is where you really start to see this. You might see it a little bit earlier than that. But this is this interveinal chlorosis. And so this is sulfur deficiency. Sulfur deficiency also shows up in soybeans as well. But today here we're talking about it showing up in corn. So, let's think back to several years ago, there was the Clean Air Act, right? And so what the Clean Air Act did is I stand here and look at, we're in the Springfield area today and we've got smokestacks from the power plants here. The Clean Air Act was really designed to try to clean up the smoke that comes out of smokestacks at power plants. Well, what we used to get out of those smokestacks was free sulfur deposited in the atmosphere and into the soil. And so we don't get that anymore. And so now we have to add or supplement the soil with sulfur. And sometimes people don't think quite as much about sulfur. I know Lance has talked probably at length about sulfur in previous episodes at different times throughout the years. But as you think about NP and K, sulfur would probably be the fourth most important nutrient to a corn and soybean plant. And so sometimes it's considered, some people might consider it a micro or secondary or whatever, but it is the fourth most important nutrient in a plant's need for fertilizer. And since we're not getting it from the soil anymore like we used to, again, we need to supplement that. So generally speaking, 10 to 20 pounds is the recommended, how much sulfur we need. So 10 pounds at a minimum, 20 pounds would be about the maximum that we would need. You can get it in many different forms. Typically, you're going to get it somewhere in the sulfate form, which is what we would generally recommend. Yes, you could use elemental sulfur, but that's generally not what most people are utilizing. Typically, you're using an ATS, a KTS, or even an AMS, and you're getting sulfur in some sort of a sulfate type form. And that's what we would recommend. So what is, and I did this as well just so we could, people could see it and help me remember to make sure I mention everything. But what is the role or the benefit of having sulfur? So it is a structural component in amino acids and in protein synthesis. So it is very important in protein synthesis within the plant. It plays a part in chlorophyll production as well. It is important when we talk about metabolizing nitrogen and just overall energy production within the plant. There's a lot of debate out there around, what might the yield bump be? Obviously, that's going to depend upon what your organic matter is, how much ability the soil has to apply sulfur, how much sulfur you've got actually, in the soil, what your demands are, all that kind of stuff. But there's some people might say, that putting 15 pounds of sulfur on corn is worth 10 bushel. I don't know that I would call it that. It might be somewhere in the neighborhood. I generally try to think about, yes, it's a positive return on investment. Is it 5? Is it 7? Is it 8 bushel? But I personally believe if you're not putting sulfur on your fields today, you absolutely need to be, and just figure out how best it fits into your operation. Some people are putting it on with a planter. Some people are putting it on with their pre-emerge herbicide, which is probably the most predominant or most common way that it's being applied today. The main point is get 10 to 20 pounds of sulfur on every acre. And I think you will easily see a yield bump for that. So I think we'll stop talking about that so far. So let's just talk a little bit about maybe the season as it's unfolding. And obviously this is going to vary a heck of a lot depending upon what part of the world you're in. But a lot of us started out, fairly dry. A lot of my geography got in early as far as planting, and we got a great start in April, getting a lot of crop in the ground. And today, as it would appear, that was the right thing to do when we probably should have been hitting it harder and planting more back in April whenever we had the opportunity to. And that doesn't always play out. There are certainly years where that's the wrong thing to do, right? There's always a voodoo day or voodoo days every planting season. But this year, it certainly feels like, we should have been out and about more aggressively planting stuff back in April, because we took a pretty good hiatus there for a little while, around Mother's Day, give or take, where we didn't have the opportunity to plant a lot of crop because we were on the wetter side. So as we think about the forecast for the next couple of weeks, it looks like we're going to get into a little bit more of a hotter, drier pattern here. And so those earlier planted crops that have a better established root development or root mass, they are going to endure the heat and the dryness that we're about to go through a lot better, in the coming weeks, because their roots have gotten down deep enough into the profile where they can tap into some subsoil moisture and help endure that stress that we're going to have the opportunity to enjoy, if you will, the coming weeks. The younger planted crops, the stuff that's just recently been planted in the last couple of weeks, that doesn't have near as good of a root mass under it, is going to stall out a little bit more and struggle a little bit more with continuing to grow through this hotter, drier period that it looks like we're going to have here for the coming days. And I would say even the stuff that is what might have been put in a tad wet, is also going to struggle, because those roots were compromised, and when you have compromised roots, it's going to be a little bit challenging. So it's actually, I thought I'd show this picture. So excuse me, this would be corn that's rolling. This is some of the worst I've seen, but it hasn't been uncommon, at least part of my geography, to drive around the last couple of days and find corn that's rolling. And again, there's corn not, in this area, there's corn just past it that looks perfectly fine and not rolling a bit. Why is this corn rolling right here? Again, I would say this is corn that has a compromised root. This is a little bit more of a wetter part of the field. And so the roots just haven't quite as developed as well as the better drained parts of the field. And so it's showing that stress a lot easier and a lot quicker than the other plants within the field. So it's kind of easy to tell where we've maybe done some things wrong, or where we've got some, where we might have had some self-imposed issues or some Mother Nature imposed issues. But it's going to be kind of easy to tell some of those, because some of the stuff that's probably going to roll the quickest is where maybe we've got too much compaction or a wet hole or something like that. I also would kind of going along with this, there has been some places where, and I've talked to one grower about this, where we actually are concerned that we may have some rootless corn in some of these situations as well. So when the corn was maybe planted a little bit on the too wet side, and then as we've turned dry, those roots have not developed near as well. And so you end up with rootless corn. And so the corn is going to get floppy, and it may tip over, it may fall down. And there's nothing you can do about that other than to pray for rain. I know people have tried to cultivate corn to where maybe they could throw some dirt towards the base of the plant to try to help prop it up. But the best thing you can do if you've got underdeveloped roots and sitting in dry soils is to pray for rain. Because roots cannot grow in a saturated soil, and roots cannot grow in a soil that has no moisture whatsoever at all. So those are the opposite ends of the spectrum, and roots don't grow very well in either one of those. And you've got to have some moisture content to have root development. I guess the other thing that I want, or a couple of the comments that I want to say in talking about this, and just kind of looking at the crop as we see it today, we're not near I don't think we're going to be in anywhere close to a situation like we were a year ago, right? So if we think back to a year ago, June was considerably drier, and we were all really, really nervous about what our crop was going to turn out to be. So I think one thing that we learned from last year is that we can endure a pretty dry June and still raise a respectable crop. And the reason for that is, right, is that we are still, the grain fill periods, the pollination and the grain fill period are the most important growing or growth stages of a plant's life cycle. And so, we're not in those today. So we can endure some stress now during the month of June and still have a respectable crop. So I guess my point with that is, yes, it can be ugly to look at, And it may not be all that enjoyable to see, and it may be a little bit depressing, but there's still plenty of time and plenty of opportunity, whether we've got, again, some corn that might be rolling, or maybe we've got some uneven stands because of the wet holes we had and some of the replant we had to do. Maybe we're missing some plants because there's too much rain in some situations, but it's still entirely too early to give up on the crop, and bushels still matter. So let's not give up and lose hope on doing our best to try to create every bushel that we possibly can in the crop. Is there any questions that are coming through?
No, but I'll give you a heads up that Lance is watching.
Oh, is he?
And he says he's just keeping an eye on the guest stuff. I'm not supposed to tell you, but I can't not tell you.
This is I'm sitting here. I've got two producers in the room, if you will. They are constantly giggling and laughing and smirking, and something about that they're reading on their phone or reading, and so I'm like, God, what are people saying? Right? It's giving me it's giving me a little bit of a guilty conscience, or it's making me wonder. Making me wonder, what in the heck am I doing up here? What am I saying wrong? What am I doing wrong? What's going on? Because I keep getting these smirks from my producers, and it's making me kind of nervous a little bit.
You're doing a great job. Keep it up.
So I'll blame a subpar performance on my part to that. So a little bit of stage fright, maybe. Any questions that have come in?
No, just Adam and Lance checking in on you.
Gotcha. Well, Lance, I'm glad you're watching. I hope you enjoy your day with your daughter, and we'll do our best to try to deliver on something that's of your standards. So
a viewer says, we all love Cal, just keep being smart. So there's some encouragement.
All right, good deal.
Oh, I can see I will have to up my game. Ability to have slide pictures on screen behind you is pretty sick.
Yeah, well, we thought we would try something a little different. So I've talked about this for years. So Lance, as you guys all well know, Lance has this amazing ability to stand in front of an audience of people, whether it's one person or 500 people, and talk about anything and everything at length. And it's an amazing ability that a lot of us look at him and just in awe that he has that ability to do that. I am not at all like that. I need some level of prep. I need some level of okay, what are the key points I want to make? I need to think about the story I'm going to tell, how I want to tell it, and the things that I want to say. And I lean on backdrops and visual aids and whatnot considerably more than what he does to help try to tell the story. So we just have different approaches. So that's partly why we have some of this as well today to talk about, and to use.
Yeah, we have a great balance of agronomists on our team, and we're adding a new agronomist onto our team as well. So that's a positive.
Yes, yeah. As we've kind of reorganized the state a little bit, so Rachel Willis would be a counterpart of ours that has been around for years. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with Rachel over the years, and so maybe we'll get her on some episodes in the future as well. So okay, let's keep talking a little bit about maybe some things that are currently going on. So just hit on a little bit on weed control, because there is some things. There are some post applications that are still happening. I still get this question fairly regular from growers. So let's just hit a couple things on weed control. One, obviously, we need to declare that yes, the timing or the application ability for dicamba or XtendiMax or the other formulations in soybeans has come and gone. Right. So yesterday was the last day technically on the calendar that we could have made an application in soybeans. Yesterday was too hot to have been making an application. So by the way the label was written, technically Tuesday would have been the last day that we could have made any applications of XtendiMax locally in soybeans. So that has come and gone, right? So now we're going to have to lean on other herbicides, Roundup, Liberty, predominantly going forward to clean up any weeds that we may have in soybean fields. On the corn side, there's still a lot of applications to be made on corn. I am continually surprised by the amount of issues we've had with water hemp this year, and where we are. I guess change the way I'm saying this. There's far more dicamba being added to corn post applications. And so, to back up a little bit, I would say most post applications, whether it's corn or soybeans, are being exposed to more weeds than we would ideally like when we're doing these post applications. So in other words, our pre's have basically ran out or not been as effective as we would have hoped, right? And so why is that? What could have caused that? Was that because we put them on 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago, and they physically have just their half life is gone, and they've ran out of gas, and so they're not as effective anymore? Is it because we were too dry in some places, and maybe we didn't get good activation after those applications were made? Or has it been too wet in some places to where those products have moved through the soil profile and have lost effectiveness because of just too much moisture? Or easily, like most agronomists would say, it's probably not any one situation. It's or one cause. It's probably in most cases a combination of those as to why we probably have more weeds out there today that we're going to have to rely on our post products to clean up. And unfortunately, it seems like, again, in a lot of corn situations right now, there's more and more people that are throwing dicamba in to try to help clean up water hemp. Because we're continuing to run into problems with the HPPDs, and I don't really care which product you want to talk about, but the HPPDs are struggling anymore to try to help clean up water hemp in corn. So, the irony, right? I love to talk about this, but the irony of the fact that we can no longer make applications of dicamba in soybeans, but we could go out today if we wanted to, right, and make an application of dicamba in corn, regardless of what the date is on the calendar or what the forecasted high is for the day. And I love to kind of poke fun about that double standard that we have, and that ability. Now, I have to sometimes watch maybe a little bit of what I say, because there may come a day where the same rules and implications come on corn. So we have to watch a little bit of how we talk about that. But I any chance I get, I guess I love to try to call out the double standard that exists there, and what we can and can't do between the different crops and the different formulations we could use, right? I mean, because we could run out there with Banville or Clarity or generic dicambas today, and we could hang the boom all the way to the edge of the field, regardless of what the temperature is, regardless of what the wind direction is, regardless of what is next door to us. Now, I'm not saying those are all great. Those are all things we should do, right? I mean, we still need to be good stewards of the product. But I like to point out the fact that there is that double standard that's there. So I guess my encouragement is that if you do still have post applications on corn, I would encourage you to consider throwing a dicamba in to try to help clean up any of the water hemp that are out there, because I personally have sprayed some HPPDs on some plots myself, and the it just absolutely did not even touch the water hemp. Didn't phase it. There's no symptomology whatsoever at all. I didn't include the dicamba whenever I made the first application. I didn't think I needed it. And yesterday I was out cleaning up some of those plots and trying to eradicate some of those water hemp that still existed out there today. And as again, I've talked to a lot of different customers that they're throwing a couple ounces of status, or they're using Diflex, or they're using different products to help try to clean up water hemp in corn. I'm getting another guilty conscience because Jennifer just made another smirk about something that she read. So
Lance Tarchioni sounds like a damn good reason to plant soybean resistance to dicamba, no matter what.
Well, and Lance makes a very good point. And I would say that that's actually part of the reason why we've seen a resurgence in sales of XtendFlex soybeans, is because of that exact same reason, right? So guys may not be using dicamba in soybeans, but because there is more dicamba being used in corn, and because some of the same rules don't apply, right? Our soybeans are still vulnerable to vapor or physical drift or tank contamination or something, right? And so the fact that there is more dicamba being utilized in corn every year has kind of made has prompted people to move back to XtendFlex soybeans to protect their soybean crop from any potential issues from the applications we make in corn. And while we appreciate getting that business, I mean, I think it does. It is a good notion. It does make good sense. I mean, I think if I was, if I were to put myself in the customer's shoes, I would be doing the exact same thing to protect my soybean crop.
We've got a question from Mr. Adam Anner.
Oh,
Nonetheless,
wonderful. But note, I asked Adam if he wanted to co-host this with me today, and he turned me down. So I'll poke him a little bit
he said
there.
he didn't qualify.
Yeah, he didn't qualify because he didn't qualify as an agronomist.
I think we'd all say he's
he plays an agronomist quite well and pretty regular. So what's on your mind, Adam?
He just was curious if you would talk about early flowering in soybeans.
I am going to talk about that. That is on my agenda. So you're jumping ahead, but that is on my agenda to talk about.
Go ahead and keep going. We'll get to it when we get to it. Then.
Yeah, I don't know that I've got anything else to talk about with on soybeans. I was going to hit a little bit, just real briefly, make a comment on nitrogen, and then we'll pivot to talking about soybeans flowering and talk a little bit about corn fungicides to wrap this up. So I don't know how we're doing. I'm trying to look on time. I had a feeling I would probably not be able to talk and fill the whole hour, but I might be able to. I'm kind of on pace to do that. So I do need to get a drink though. All right. As far as nitrogen goes, again, the only thing I would say is if you feel like if you have any concerns because of some of the rainfall that we've had, and there's some places that have had several inches of rain since their nitrogen was applied. If you feel like you are short on nitrogen, I guess Lance and I would encourage you to hurry up, and if you think you need to make an application, let's work on getting that done. In whatever form you want to do that in, right? Because while there's not a lot of rain in the forecast, there is some rain in the forecast in the coming in the future. But let's get that application made, and let's try to hope that we do catch a rain to try to help incorporate that, while the stabilizers do provide some security to us. They will at some point in time lose their effectiveness as well, and we will have to have a rain at some point in time to incorporate that nitrogen into the soil. And obviously, we're not here to promote or sell or anything as far as Y drops go, but obviously that's one of the big things that Y drop talks about, or the folks that sell Y drops and the people that have them, right, is because you make that nitrogen application right at the base of the plant, and you get to rely on some stem water to help incorporate that nitrogen into the soil. So agronomically, there is some benefit to that. Sorry, Jennifer's got another big grin on her face, but
you're doing exactly what they said. They said make sure he smiles a little bit.
What Y drops are a great system, but that is not the only way that you can apply nitrogen. Obviously, there's some side dress applications that you could do. You could do it in a couple different fashions, but again, I would just encourage you that if you feel like you need some additional nitrogen, let's hurry up and get that done before the crop gets away from us. But that way, we get it into the soil. That way, we can get it in a form that is available to the corn plant and get it taken up by the corn plant whenever the corn plant needs it. Okay, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about soybean flowering. And so we're going to try something different here as well. We're going to try to use this flip chart and talk a little bit about soybean flowering. So I'm not a very good artist, but let's look at kind of a typical type curve, if you will. And it's a good thing I still have a microphone on to pick up my voice whenever I'm not on screen. So if we think about this is the hours, if I could spell, of daylight in a day. Okay. So here real soon at the summer solstice, right here at the peak, is June 21st, right? That is the summer solstice. Scoot this over some more so that I can still be in the frame. Not that anybody wants to see me. All right, so June 21st is the summer solstice. That is the day in which we capture, or we have the most sunlight of any day on the calendar, right? Oh, yeah, awesome. If we can zoom in on that, perfect. And that's somewhere in the notion of, let's say, 15 hours of sunlight or so in that in the day. So typically what happens, I'll change colors here. So let's talk about it. As we're approaching June 21st, we are getting more and more minutes or hours of sunlight in every day. And then once we hit June 21st, we start to lose those hours of sunlight and as the summer goes on, right? Going back to something that a guy by the name of Dan Zink that used to work with us years ago that Lance has a ton of admiration for, as do I. Dan Zink, he when he talks some about trying to push planting dates up, Dan always used to make the comment that at the end of the day, we are harvesting a crop that is driven off of photosynthesis and off of sunlight, right? And so why not have the biggest plant you can possibly have on June 21st to capture the most sunlight that we actually have in a growing season, okay? But let's talk about soybean flowering. So typically what happens, Jennifer had zoomed in so much she took me out of frame, so I gotta keep moving in here so I can interject my face. So typically what happens after June 21st, so we hit summer solstice, and as the minutes or hours of daylight get shorter after that, soybeans will sense the amount of time that it is dark and they will initiate flowering. They will convert from a vegetative stage of growth to a reproductive stage of growth. So let's say a 2-7 bean may initiate flowering about here, okay? So it's going to initiate flowering first. And then a 3-5 might be shortly after that, and then a 4-0 is going to be shortly after that, right? So typically that's how this will happen. Is again after the summer solstice, those plants will sense how much darkness there is per night, and they will move from into a reproductive stage of growth, and they will initiate flowering. Well, what's been fun to see in the last couple of years, and we've seen this occasionally at different times in the last couple of years, is right this critical number also happens over here, right? As does this one. These critical numbers also happen on the other side of the curve. And so what happens is that as we're gaining daylight, that plant is also sensing that period of darkness that it needs to flip to flowering. They might experience that in May sometime. I actually had a guy send me a picture on May 25th that he had soybeans that were flowering. And those actually, it's kind of a fun story, but those actually were beans that he planted in February. He was just actually kind of messing around with the planter and planted them in February. But what happens is, again, that same number of, because it doesn't have to happen on the downhill slide of that chart. It can happen on the uphill side. So that's why we have soybeans that are flowering. So sometimes we're seeing beans that are maybe flowering that might be, ankle tall or shin tall. They're early planted beans. They've hit that critical period of darkness, and so they've flipped to flowering. And so that's why we see some beans that are flowering now. And this is kind of fun for me because the light bulb, I think, just went off in Jennifer's head for this conversation. I have tried, I think, 2 or 3 times before to explain this to her. And I think this is the first time that it finally resonated. So it's kind of nice to see. It's the teacher's fault, right? It's the teacher's fault. But that's why we're seeing. That's why some soybean fields will flower as early as they are, is because they're experiencing that critical point prior to the summer solstice. Okay. So I will butcher some numbers, but I will make an attempt to share something that some good friends of mine and some great colleagues did years ago at BASF. They went out and actually I won't use the chart, or I won't draw it. So, some friends of mine went out years ago and they looked at they had a planting date study. So they planted soybeans at different times. So let's say maybe a mid-April, late April, mid-May type time period. They had multiple different planting dates. And they sent interns out in the field Austin, this could be something we could make you do, but they sent interns out into the field, and they staged the growth of the soybean plant every single day for the entire growing season. And they charted that. And what they discovered is that part of the, in my opinion, part of the secret sauce, if you will, as to why earlier planted soybeans are generally better is because the earlier planted soybeans spend more time flowering than later planted soybeans. So I will kind of draw this out. Let's say, and again, this is going to be hypothetical. This is not going to be exact numbers, but I'll use it to try to help drive home the point or the illustration. So let's talk about, let's say, like April 10th planted beans. Let's do like April 25th planted beans, and then let's do like May 10th planted beans. So, you might have a month's worth of difference in planting date here, but we all recognize that that month's difference in planting date will not equal a month's difference in harvest date at the end. It's generally about half, give or take, right? So these beans planted April 10th, these beans planted May 10th, they're gonna ripen or be ready to cut roughly about 2 weeks apart, because these beans are gonna catch up, right, to some degree. But let's just say, so R2 is full flower. Let's just say, for example, and again, this is not going to be exact. Let's say this is hypothetical, or this is exactly hypothetical. But what they discovered is that beans that are planted earlier, their longer growing season, they don't distribute those extra days of the growing season equally across all the different growth stages. It's predominantly in the R2 growth stage, which is full flower. So let's say April 10th planted soybeans may spend 40 days in R2. Okay, might be 30 days, whatever the number is, but it's more than the others, right? And as we plant beans later, we spend less days in R2. And right, so you have to have flowers in order to, flowers turn into pods. You have to have nodes, obviously, to put on flowers, but flowers turn into pods. And so this is part of the science, if you will, or I would say why earlier planted beans are generally better than later planted beans is because they spend more time flowering. And this also goes to a little bit, we could talk through this, is that, if you're planting soybeans later, this could shed some light on why we push populations as we go later into the growing season as well, because it's about nodes per acre, or flowers per acre, if you will, right? Because in earlier planted beans, they're going to get taller, they're going to have more vegetative growth, and they're going to have more nodes and more places to put on flowers. Later planted beans stay shorter, so you have less nodes, you have less places for flowers. So the only way to compensate for that is to put more plants out there. So I wanted to go through this illustration and talk a little bit about, as we're seeing some beans flowering here ahead of the summer solstice, and some beans, again, 2 weeks ago, as early as 2 weeks ago, some beans were flowering across my geography. And why is that? So hopefully that makes sense. And I think I've hit on everything that I wanted to call out there. And I wanted to share, again, this data because it was kind of eye-opening to me, and it helped me understand kind of what's going on in the soybean plant as I think about different planting dates and throughout the growing season. Is there a follow-up question that's come in with that, Jennifer?
No follow-up question, just a lot of Lance and Adam banter that we love to see. So they're living vicariously, even though we're taking on their jobs.
Yeah, because normally when Lance is doing this, Adam is the producer, and so between the two of them, I'm sure I'm giving them plenty of ammunition and plenty of things to poke fun at me about. So, but that's okay. I don't care. And if I do that bad of a job, they won't invite me to come back. So, whatever. That's okay. All right. So.
I have a question from a grower via text message.
Okay.
I'm planting beans today. How many should I plant?
Yeah, great question. So I'm planting beans today. How much should I plant? So I don't know what row spacing you're in, what type of situation you're in, as far as soil type. Is it irrigated? Is it non-irrigated? Those different types of things. But generally, I would say at today's date on the calendar, we should be at least 160. Would be the number that I would throw out. So that's in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% greater than what we would have been planting back in April.
15-inch river gumbo.
Yeah, 15. And I don't know that, I mean, I will say I'm glad to hear that it is 15-inch row beans because, I like to poke fun at this as well. I'm gonna put that down before I make sounds. I have to have something to fidget with. Um, row spacing in beans is one of the few things that about every seed company and every university agrees on, right? All of us say that narrow rows are generally better than 30-inch rows. Well, what I do kind of enjoy is Dr. Sean Connolly, which is the cool bean guy at University of Wisconsin. He would contend that the earlier you plant beans, row spacing doesn't matter. But as you get later into the growing season, row spacing does become more important. And so I'm glad to hear that it is something narrower than 30s, just because again, plants aren't going to get as tall. We need to capture more sunlight. We're doing a better job of covering the soil, if you will, or the ground by spreading those plants out, and by putting more plants out there, we're going to have them more evenly distributed in a narrower row versus a 30-inch row. But again, I would still say, I don't know that my number really changes much based on row spacing. So I still think the 160 stands. I would say nothing less than 160 today. I don't know that we really, I don't see much need unless there's certain situations where the soil is really compromised or a seed bed or some of that, where maybe I would add a slop factor in there, if you will, to that. But I still think that's where my number would stand today.
They're going to plant it at 180.
Hey, that's okay too. I won't balk at that. That's why I said 160 at a minimum. I've learned over the years that every time somebody asks me about what population on soybeans should you recommend, I generally always respond first with a question about, well, what do you normally plant? Because if somebody's normally at 150 and I'm telling them to plant 125 or 130, they may think I'm absolutely nuts. And so I sometimes have to figure out where's people at already before I make a recommendation on what they do.
Well, whatever helps you sleep at night commentary.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, so now we're going to change gears and we're going to talk a little bit about corn fungicide. And do you want to see if you can play with the iPad to zoom in a little bit more on the TV screen for us? So so again, we switched to an iPad today to try to do this because we can zoom with an iPad, whereas the Surface or the notebook or tablet, whatever you want to call it, that we normally use to do this, we don't have a zoom feature. So producer Jennifer is actively messing with the iPad here to try to see what she can get done. So let's talk a little bit about corn fungicide, because corn is nearing the growth stage where we need to be making or thinking about fungicide applications. And so this might be a little bit difficult, but I'll talk through this slide behind me a little bit. Yeah, you can go up higher even yet and zoom in a little bit more. Go up higher some more. Yep. A little bit more. A little bit more. There you go. All right, now you can zoom in a little bit more. I can see myself. She can't. So she was trying to do all this with behind the iPad, so she can't see exactly what I get to see. Okay, so in my personal opinion, and based on all the data that's out there, and I think if you talk to any company, any fungicide rep, anybody, I still am a firm believer in the best timing for a fungicide application is at VT to R1. And so that, again, that's right when we have tassel. So a lot of times guys will look, is the field tasseled? They'll see the first couple tassels come out. They'll give it a day or two, maybe just so that we get tassels across the entire field. They'll turn that field loose for an application. Well, you're getting me all kinds of wonky now.
Oh my, went the wrong direction.
Yeah. So they'll turn that field loose. They'll turn it in for application, and the to where hopefully that timing of application is just perfectly aligned with all the plants in the field being tasseled. So I'm a firm believer in, if we go back to a bell curve for response to fungicide application, the top of that bell curve, the the biggest yield response we can get today from a fungicide application is still at VT to R1. That is the top of the bell curve in my mind, right? If we go back to a couple of years ago, we had a wet time period where we were, we were wet during fungicide season. We couldn't get ground applications made. It put a big strain on the aerial application business. A lot of applications were 2 to 3 weeks behind, and a lot of people were concerned about that. So there started this conversation around, well, could we be making applications slightly earlier than VT? And I think that's possible, and that's warranted in some situations. Um, the thing I challenge people to think about is that if we're going to go out around V12 or maybe V14 time period, and if we're going to go out at that time period and we're going to make a fungicide application, we are guaranteeing ourselves that we are going to make we're going to make two applications on that field. Because there is no way that we can rely on that fungicide that we put on at V12 or V14 to get us well into grain fill and protect that plant. So I'm comfortable with people, and there are times I make recommendations, right? So if you want to make those applications at that time period, again, that's fine, but you're guaranteed that you're going to have to make two applications in that growing season. So generally speaking, when a guy's asking me, well, how do I want to approach fungicide? What should I be doing? I generally say, hey, let's go forward with the plan that we are going to stick with a VT application. That's going to be our goal. And then we're going to assess how the growing season is playing out and decide whether or not we should make an application earlier than that, or maybe we should make a subsequent application after that. But we need to build a plan. And the plan is, for me, is to always focus on that VT application as the number one application. Because again, I feel like that's the peak of the bell curve for the biggest yield bump of any application we're going to make. Now, if we have tar spot's new, obviously, right, from a couple years ago, but if we think about, tar spot and how, what's the growing season playing out like? And are we staying in a really wet May and a really wet June? Because wet Junes are a very good indicator or driver to how bad or how quick tar spot will come in and infect our corn. So if we would have stayed in this really wet pattern that we were having here, and we were continually catching rain for the next couple of weeks, I think we were easily set up to have some really bad tar spot across our geography. So I'm a little bit relieved, honestly, that we're running into a drier pattern here. That where hopefully maybe the tar spot, maybe that might help keep tar spot at bay. But again, if we would have continued on this path of having a above average rainfall, heavy dews, that type of stuff, I possibly would have been encouraging some people to start thinking about maybe moving those applications up in corn, especially if we would have started to identify tar spot already in cornfields. And I know there has been, I've seen some posts online, there has been some tar spot show up, not within my geography that I'm aware of, in other parts of the country, but in some really early corn, or young corn, I guess I should say, not early corn, but young corn, where maybe it's like V8, V10 type stage of growth. So something else to think about is, so then you start thinking about, okay, well, do I make two applications or do I make just one application? Again, I think those are all questions we need, or all things we need to think about is how is the growing season shaping up? If I go back to 21, the crop of 21, we had severe southern rust, and we had quite a bit of tar spot come in 21. And so sequential applications in 21 made a tremendous amount of sense. And I was amazed, because generally you would think about, making applications past R3 is probably, something that most people would not do. And I remember having those conversations back in 2021. Guys were looking at R4, R5 type corn. And was like, well, should I still make an application? And we felt like that window was almost closed as to whether or not that application made sense, that the potential for return was almost negligible. And lo and behold, we learned afterwards that actually some of those applications still made us money. You basically could have made an application of fungicide at any point in time in the growing season in 2021 and made money from it. Now 2022 was different, right? We didn't have as much disease. 23, we had a little bit more disease than we did in 22, but and tar spot came in late. So 24 yet to be determined. I think things that get, and I'm happy to engage in these conversations, but typically things that I talk about with customers is that as we're thinking about making those VT applications, you've got a choice to make. Is could you bump up the rate? Because typically what happens, right, is most products, let's use Delaro or Delaro Complete, for example, most products have a rate range when we talk about making VT applications. And that rate range for Delaro and Delaro Complete is 8 to 12 ounces. Well, almost all the time, we gravitate to the lower end of the spectrum for whatever the rate range is. So most of our Delaro applications go out the door at 8 ounces to the acre at a VT timing, right? So you have a choice, right? So you could make the decision to say, well, I don't want. Let's back up. How do I get protection further into the growing season or into the grain fill period, right? You got two ways of doing that. You've got one way of saying, well, instead of making an application of 8 ounces, I'm going to make an application of 12 ounces. And that 12-ounce application gets me a longer half-life and gets me further into the grain fill period without having to pay for a second application, right? Because to me, those are the two ways you can do it. You can either make a sequential application or you can bump up your rate at VT. And both of those have merit. And both of those are okay. And both of those are perfectly fine. And customers do both of them. And that's okay. So as we start to near tassel time and we start to think about, in 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now, when we're starting to make those applications, we're going to have to be, making some of those decisions and some of those calls, if you will, on the fly of what's the growing season look like? Are we seeing tar spot yet? Do we have any gray leaf yet? How are things playing out? What do things look like? Because we have to make that. We have the opportunity, if you will, to make that decision of do we stick with our 8-ounce rate? Do we bump up to 12? Do we make a sequential application? If I'm just looking at tar spot, for me, still the recommended application that I would make is a VT application and then come back within 21 to 28 days after that. So probably somewhere in this R3 time period and make a sequential application at R3. And that to me is my lead recommendation when I start talking about, especially addressing tar spot, but even some cases where we've had, again, like back in 2021, where we had severe southern rust. As things play out, that definitely has some benefit when we start talking about crown rot as well in corn. So I'm trying to think about other things that I wanted to say here, but I think I've covered most everything. Is there any questions that have come in?
No, Lance just made an additional comment. The third way people try to extend control is delaying the V2 to R2 or later.
Correct.
Not a growth strategy.
Yep. Yeah. So something Lance has been very adamant about for years is that sometimes people, and there have been times in my past that I would do this as well, but there's been times where people have pushed that application all the way to maybe brown silk. And that can oftentimes, the old adage is if you see disease, it's too late because there's more infection in the plant than what you can see. So what I didn't realize was that I'm bumping up against time already. So I'm a little bit surprised.
And Lance always says it. You got plenty of stuff to talk about.
Yep.
You can run over.
Yep. I have hit my list of things that I had, and I've covered everything. So a couple things that we'll close this out with. One is the next episode of Ask the Agronomist that I assume Lance will be back on, and he will want to take the reins back. It'll be 2 weeks from today on June 27th. So that would be the next episode of Ask the Agronomist. Jennifer had said something earlier about she wanted to have a second talk about our Yield Chasers event.
Yeah, so we had a great opportunity yesterday to look at new venues. So we are adding a third contest to our Yield Chasers event for this next year. And so we are looking to host our event on February 5th in the Peoria area. So just a new update, just to keep that in the back of your mind. You're talking about fungicide. Right. Another reason to add fungicide is to chase some yields.
Correct.
So keep that in mind. We'll have more details coming out about the specifics probably in the next month or so, but just wanted to confirm with folks that we are doing that again. And there will actually be a third contest we'll be hosting this year.
Yep.
So if you're up in like the Mercer County, Bureau County area, we'll be including you in our contest for 2024.
Yep. So with that, I guess it's been an honor to be here and be a guest host today. Lance, hopefully I did it justice for you and it met your standards. But hope everybody has a great day. Do your best to stay cool out there and enjoy your day and be safe. Thanks.